This is Alvy, Atari Ray Smith podcast.
I remember at one point some magazine said that, that LucasFilm had the best computer graphics in the game industry, and Alvy Ray Smith said that the games industry had the worst computer graphics that Lucasfilm had ever done.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Peter Langston was a founding employee at the game development company LucasArts, part of the team that created the Atari 8-bit games Ballblazer and Rescue on Fractalus. Peter composed Song of the Grid, the memorable theme to Ballblazer. He also created the classic mainframe game Empire, and Oracle, the precursor to the Usenet Oracle, now called Internet Oracle. Check his website at langston.com for an interesting collection of papers, scans of LucasArts articles, and related material. This interview took place on January 16th, 2016. So I understand that you were a pre-founder of LucasArts, which is thrilling and exciting. But before that, I noticed Wikipedia said that you created a couple of my favorite old internet-y things. You developed the precursor to the Internet Oracle.
Yeah, the original Oracle idea was mine, and basically it was I was inspired to do it by people. You tell people about how great the computer is. This was at a time when most people didn't have any experience with a computer. They just, had seen them maybe in a movie. And if you were showing them the computer, you'd say, yeah, it's great. It can solve all kinds of things. And then they'd say, ask it what the meaning of life is, or some such thing for which you were completely unprepared. And it occurred to me that really a nice way to deal with those things would be to do a situation where each person got to answer somebody else's question, and it made it somehow look like the computer was doing all that. Mm-hmm. And so that was the idea of saying, well, that's a great question. I'll have to think about that. But while I'm thinking about it, perhaps you could answer this question for me, and then emailing the answer to the previous previous asker. And so then moving that to the internet seemed like an obvious expansion.
Nice. Well, I discovered the Usenet Oracle in 1989 or so, and the other day, actually, apropos of nothing, I'm just like, I wonder what happened to the Oracle, and it's still going strong. I mean, people are still using it like crazy. It's amazing. I love it.
Well, I for a while I worked at a large Wall Street law firm, and we were sort of introducing computers there. And so for some of the secretaries, it was kind of a scary thing to have a computer. And a few game kind of things really eased matters for them. And in particular, the Oracle, they loved the Oracle because it was kind of a way to gossip without, anonymously. And so I discovered that, about half their time on the computer seemed to be running the Oracle. And I think they quickly got it as to what was actually going on, but it didn't seem to interfere with the fun of it any to have figured out the trick.
Nice. And you also you created the game Empire? Is that right?
Yeah. It's true. The cause of more than one academic suicide, and actually, people got so involved in the game that on one occasion, the vice president of a major New York financial corporation went in to the offices on a Saturday and cut the power in the computer room because somebody was attacking his country.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, tell me where did the idea come from? How did you just tell me a story about
Empire?
creating Empire? Yeah.
Well, I think the initial idea came while I was working on the staff and teaching at the Evergreen State College, where they had a computer running HP Basic, which had names of programs limited to 6 letters, and so I created quite a bunch of games, all of whose names were 6 letters long, like Convoy, Galaxy, Empire, and Galaxy was the one that was sort of a precursor to Empire. In that one, you were doing exploration using spaceships, and it was kind of a realistic exploration, which of course meant that it was not any fun at all because it took so long to do anything. And so then I was, trying to speed up time. And then I realized, okay, this needs to be narrowed down a little. And one of my students said, why don't you just do it on a single planet? And he had an idea about you'd be modeling civilization. So he made something called Civil, which of course is only 5 letters. So I figured, no, that can't be right. And so at that point, I did Empire, and taking his idea of having it just be a single planet. Although I let I had the program generate a planet semi-randomly, trying to simulate tectonic forces forming land masses and so forth. And I remembered at that point, I got an undergraduate degree at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, where there's a long-running game called Empire, which is a board game, has been going for years, and a single game of Empire could last several semesters. And it was an interesting game in that it was flexible. Rules were being created as the game went on. Pieces were being added. Concepts were being added. And there was one room of one of the dorms which was devoted entirely to this game. And I knew a lot of players of this game, but I had maybe spent 10 minutes talking with them about it, and it just seemed really interesting and seemed very big. It's like they were simulating everything, or at least that was the desire. And so that was pretty much as much as I knew about it, but those seemed like good ideas. And so I thought, well, the computer is a much better way to do this. So I just took this kind of concept of a single planet and exploration on it, but also, warfare, diplomacy, trying to establish industry and manage industry, and let it grow as much detail as possible. And so that became Empire, and that was kind of the impetus behind it. I made it modular enough that it was easy to add things, and easy to have it running and people using it while you're adding things. You didn't need to be done before people could play with it.
Oh, neat.
And then also the idea that, at that time, what was available was relatively large computers that a lot of people used at once, time-shared computers. So it was designed to take advantage of the fact that there were a lot of people involved. My sense was that the thing that made a game really fun was interaction with other people. And so the time-shared system was a perfect way to interact with other people almost surreptitiously. It wasn't obvious that was actually where the fun and the depth of the game was coming from, but it was coming from the fact that other people were involved in it too.
Nice. Well, when I was in middle school, someone brought me a printout of an Empire game, and it was on very wide green bar computer paper, from some mainframe somewhere. And I was fascinated with this, it was 20 sheets of just Empire running and the maps and the descriptions. And I was just like, I thought it was amazing. And I tried half-heartedly to implement it on the Atari 800, which was not going to happen because I was not up to the challenge. And also, at least the problems were that the Atari didn't have enough graphics, didn't have in text mode, couldn't display the giant maps that I saw on the computer paper.
Right.
Anyway.
Well, the Empire, as I did it initially, and as it was the case throughout the time that I was working on it and creating it, was entirely text-based, and there was, just the most crude kind of maps generated by it, and reports also very simplistic. Mm-hmm. And as a result, people wrote wonderful programs to analyze the data that it generated. I kind of felt like I was simulating the world. I was not just simulating a display of the world. And so any way that I generated the information and gave it to people, they then could format it in whatever way they wanted to look at it. And people indeed wrote whole suites of programs to run countries for them and to take care of all the excessive detail in the game. So I thought that was interesting. It was almost like a programming exercise for a lot of people.
Nice. And this was created, you said, at Reed in Portland?
Well, let me see.
I live in Portland, so I'm always looking for Portland connections to things.
Right,
that's all.
Right. The choice of the name and the kind of my vague idea of what it was that the Empire players at Reed were doing came from my time at Reed. But I started Empire when I was in Olympia, working at Evergreen, and I continued it at the Harvard Science Center, and then when I was hired at a financial organization on Madison Avenue in New York. That's where the vice president shut down the computer. And later at a Wall Street law firm that I worked at. And in each of those places, my employment deal allowed me a certain amount of time to work on my own projects, which tended to be the games. So it was those things. When I was in Portland, I mostly did musical things.
Nice.
I love Portland, by the way. I think, I'm living in Seattle now, but I think eventually I will probably end up in Portland again.
Excellent. You should. It's great here.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did we get from Empire to LucasArts? So tell me the story of how you ended up there.
Yeah, I got involved with the Unix operating system early on, and as a result, I started making games that ran under Unix. Like after the very first version of Empire, it was then running under Unix, and I did a bunch of other games. And I then distributed those games for free through the Unix users group called Usenix. And it was through Usenix also that I met people like Tom Duff, who ended up working at Lucasfilm. And when George Lucas decided that, let me see, initially Star Wars made a surprisingly large amount of money, and George, rather than doing the usual buying land with it in order to call it an expense so wouldn't have to pay tax on it, which seems to be what people in Hollywood do, he instead funded something called the computer division there. And the computer division was charged with finding ways to use high technology in the movie business. And so out of the computer division came Pixar, Edit Droid, a lot of high-tech companies eventually came out of that. And that was Star Wars. So then when The Empire Strikes Back was about to be released, they knew there'd be a big insurge of money. They had already funded the computer division, so they were looking for a way to use this money beneficially. And the idea came up, let's see if there's other ways to use this kind of high technology approach in the entertainment industry. And so at that point, it looked like probably games was the way to do it. And I think they asked around within the company of, who they needed to hire somebody to run this. And so my name was one of the names that came up because people knew of my games work through Usenet. And I had been running a fairly large department at this large Wall Street law firm. And so they interviewed me. And it was, it's really great being at Lucasfilm because there's so much exciting stuff going on there. But it was all the way on the other side of the world from where I was living in New York. And at the time I said, well, this would be great, but I don't think, I'm not sure that I should do this. So thank you, but no. And I think they also asked a lot of other well-known graphics people, because Ed Catmull knew lots of graphics people, if they wanted to run this project. Mm-hmm. And I think universally people said, well, that sounds like a lot of fun, but that's not real work, and you'd never make any money that way. And so they came back to me and they said, are you absolutely sure that you wouldn't like to do this? And in various ways they made it impossible to resist. So I took the job and put together this, what was then called the Games Group, but later became LucasArts when I think our part of the computer division was the only part of the computer division to actually make money the first year. In part because we made a very profitable deal with Atari to give them the right of first refusal on the software we developed, even though they were busily going down the drain at the time. And so they're never able to really exercise that right. It's kind of a waste on their part.
Mm-hmm. Your website goes into detail about the ways that Atari management screwed up again and again.
Yeah, it was. Let's see, what various people working there, they were pretty funny about it. One of them called it on-the-job retirement, and it was sad because you'd see them do a reorganization almost weekly, and so people were kind of shell-shocked there. It was like they weren't actually, they'd be told, now you're working on this. And they wouldn't even really start because they knew that it probably wouldn't last more than a week, and then they'd be told they're working on something else, and anything they'd done would be tossed. So, and it was too bad because our games, which really were outstanding, and that in some cases won awards, never got released by them, even though they could have released them several times, but they were trying to use them as sort of an ace in the hole that they could then push some particular product. And as they were about to do that, then some other product manager would say, but wait, no, we should have that appear on my hardware.
Mm-hmm. They held it, I think they tried to hold it for the 5200, then they wanted to hold it for the 7800.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's kind of like Seattle with its public transit problems, where each time they decide to do it, they go for a year and then they change their mind.
And meanwhile, everyone already had the games because of piracy.
That's right. Because we were kind of innocents about that, although I think at that point everybody was. And so when, as per our contract, we gave working versions to Atari for them to evaluate, they immediately spread all over. And just as a tangent to that, I don't know if you're familiar at all with people in the world of bluegrass music, but there's a banjo player who just recently died. Name is Bill Keith, who was kind of the inventor of a style of banjo playing called melodic style. A wonderful musician, played both bluegrass and jazz and other kinds of music on the banjo. He was in the Queskin Jug Band and so forth. He was one of the people that had inspired me to do interesting music things by some of the stuff I had heard him play on the banjo, playing jazz tunes. And so the first computer music that I ever did at Reed on the computer was a piece that I had heard him play on the banjo. And so I kind of felt a connection. And in later years, I became friends with him through running a music camp out here. And one day, talking about how our interests, mutual interests in computers, I asked him how he'd ever gotten interested in computers in the first place. And he said, "Oh, I had an Atari 800, and actually, I was sort of interested in some of the games on there, although most of those games were really kind of crap, except there was this one game." And he went on to describe Ballblazer. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Really? That sounds a lot like Ballblazer." And he said, "No, I don't think that was the name. I think it was called Ballblaster." And I said, "Oh, you have the bootleg. No wonder you didn't know that I wrote that. Otherwise, you would have seen my name on the credits." So it turned out that he had early on been influenced by some of the stuff that I had done. So that was cool. But it was the bootleg.
So you wrote the Ballblazer music, right?
That's right.
That's amazing. I mean, really, one of the top 5 soundtracks written for that machine.
Well, cool.
Ever.
Thank you.
Amazing. Don't tell me that was written on a banjo, because I don't think I could handle that reality.
Well, and what's the part of the Ballblazer music that does the improvisation uses snippets of music that was contributed by a bunch of friends. Pat Metheny and Lyle Mays each contributed some things. Doc Watson contributed something, and so there's part of what makes it cool is that there's little bits of music from great musicians, and also that was sort of part of the story that in the story of the game, each year whoever wins becomes the master blazer of the year gets to contribute their fragment of advice in the form of a musical phrase, which then became part of the Song of the Grid.
That's cool. So I know you've written papers on the topic, but can you talk to me a little bit about the algorithmic composition that goes on in Ballblazer, and I don't know, just kind of an overview, or just kind of explain it to people who might not even realize that it's improvised on the fly?
Sure, but there were two parts to the improvisation. There's the part that goes on during the actual gameplay, and that part is not so much improvisation as almost data display. The rhythmic things that are going on are based on things like the position of the ball relative to you, or the plasmorb relative to you. And so they're giving you information that you can use in playing the game. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the music that plays all the other times where there's improvisation going on. And sort of my concept for that improvisation was that of what I think of as the high school guitarist who knows lots of interesting licks and phrases of music, and when improvising is just kind of stringing them together in a thoughtful way. And so what the program does is it first picks a particular fragment to start with, and as it's playing that fragment, it picks 5 possible following fragments randomly. So of its repertoire of, I can't remember now, 64 maybe fragments, it picks 5, and then based on various criteria decides which of those 5 would be the best fragment to play next. Having done that, it then plays that one next. And now this sort of establishes a different history, which plays into why it would choose one fragment over another to play next. And it picks 5 other fragments and goes on. And so each time it does it, it ends up with a different sequence. And sometimes the 5 fragments it picks are all very different from what it has been playing, just by random chance. So at that point, there will be a shift in the music. Or other times, they will be relatively similar, or there'll be one that sort of fits really well and the others don't, and so it'll be a natural thing. Had it had the whole 64 to choose from, it would end up always choosing the same sequence. You'd end up, making the sequence that fits really well, and that's all it would play. But because it only chooses 5, and this is sort of, I'm imagining, well, the high school guitarist is smoking a little dope, and he only remembers 5 at a time. And so of those, he has to quick come up with one and grabs the one that seems to fit the best. And so, and that seemed to work quite well.
Awesome. Am I wrong in thinking of it as almost a Markov chainer for music phrases?
Well, similar, although part of the problem with something like a Markov chain was it would be really easy to find the perfect sequence, and you'd be stuck with that. And so by limiting it in a random way each time, I was able to, A, force it to kind of recalculate, and B, not repeat itself.
Right.
And, there are various other things are sort of superimposed on all that, like an overall sort of arc of swelling and fading back, or double timing and so forth.
So Ballblazer, I've heard this before, but I just can't get over it. I want you to verify. Ballblazer was created as just a throwaway game, just to see what you could do. Is that right?
Yeah, both Ballblazer and Rescue on Fractalus. Well, what we did was, I said, let's come up with a few games to just sort of try out our technology, our approach. In part, we were doing a bunch of things different from what was being done in the industry at that point. We were kind of taking a big computer approach to little computers, and so we were doing development on large, fast machines and writing code either in Lisp or in an assembler that's based in Lisp, and then having it downloaded into the little machines to try it. And so we really wanted to just see, we fooling ourselves? It seems like an obvious win, but maybe there's something that's going to trip us up in this. And so we came up with half a dozen game ideas. Mm-hmm. Everything from kind of, Pong-like things to really silly things like booger hunt, where you manipulate a finger trying to get the booger out of your nose.
Oh, that's super classy. I like that.
Yeah. And we thought if we ever had to do things that followed the Star Wars things, we could do Leia Princess. Well, I'll leave that to your imagination.
Yikes.
But anyway, of all those, we sort of settled on figured if we got two that we could that were very different, we could that would give us a chance to check everything out. And so we ended up with Rescue and Fractalus, which we were able to grab Lauren from the graphics group to help us do the fractal part, and the idea that David Levine had for basically a sport that allowed us to do pretty good smooth graphic interpolation and anti-aliasing stuff. And so, but yeah, the idea was these were tests. These were, we could have. I imagine if we at that point at the point of deciding on them, if we'd said, okay, these are going to be our first games, we probably would have spent another month fighting over, is this the perfect game kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But as it was, it gave us the freedom to say, this is good enough. There's no way to prove whether it's going to be great or not, but we didn't need it to be. And then it allowed us to go ahead and spend a lot of time making it great, or making them great.
Right. Okay. So we've talked a lot specifically about Ballblazer. Tell me something interesting about Rescue. It seems like I'm guessing here, but it seems like your way of doing things differently by implementing on big hardware would really be a win for that game in particular, because it's so intensive with the fractal stuff.
Yeah, well, it was a toss-up between the two games for which one had the harder job, because the fractal stuff, initially it sounded like Well, the whole idea behind the fractals is that it's a computationally simple way to make seemingly complex graphics. So that seems like a win. On the other hand, the people that have been doing it, the Lauren Carpenters and the Mandelbrats of the world, had been using big computers and lots of time. And so the question was, could it be done on a wimpy machine? But on the other hand, for Ballblazer, doing complete anti-alias live action is also, out of the question, unless you're really clever, as David Levine was with the graphics. So, but the result was that having Lauren take on as a challenge being able to do the fractals in a small amount of space really paid off. I mean, it seemed like he would go home and the next day he'd come back and he'd say, "Well, I made it half the size of what it was yesterday." And David Fox would say, "Well, it still won't fit." And Lauren would say, "Well, are you sure?" And then, the next day he'd come back and say, "Well, it's 2/3 the size that it was yesterday." Anyway, so I think in both situations we really overcame some amazing things. I vividly remember an interviewer from a magazine. I'm trying to think what gaming magazine it was. Anyway, coming to see what we were doing, and we showed him Ballblazer, and we're in a conference room with a Atari 800 on the desk, and he literally started looking under the table and in the closet, wondering where the video disc recorder was. and we said, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm looking for where you're getting the graphics from." So that was a big moment for us. And an interesting similar moment, different moment in Rescue was when George Lucas came to try it out, and he's flying around in these canyons, being made on the fly as he's going by, and the bad guys are shooting at him, and he's looking at the thing saying, "Where's my fire button?" And David Fox is saying, "Well, we figured that the way the player would deal with it is to try and trick the pursuers into hitting the canyon walls." And George says, "Yeah, but where's my fire button?" And David said, "Well, we don't have a fire button." And George said, "Well, now is that a matter of, is that like a policy thing, or is that just too hard to do it?" And David said, "Well, we thought it was nicer if they didn't." And George said, "Put a fire button in there." And you're kind of like, "Yes, sir." and of course he was right, that people want to be able to shoot back, but you still maintained a lot of the in Rescue you're on a humanitarian mission.
Right. Was the management angry about the ineptitude of Atari and the fact that they had gotten into bed with this company that then wouldn't ship games and was just dragging their feet?
I think not. I can see how they might have been, and it's possible that they just didn't reveal it to me, because I had I didn't have daily interaction with George. I actually ran into George more often on our softball team, where he was second base and I was first, than at work. But because, at least for the first year, we were getting $1 million from Atari, whether they ever took anything or not. And then after that, it was kind of obvious that it was a question of, would you want Atari to actually be exercising its right when it's sinking so low? But of course, the question was, well, we do want to release these. What should we do? So I think it was more a matter of, okay, how should we proceed, rather than a matter of, I don't think anybody ever felt that we made a mistake by making the deal with Atari, because it did allow us to be profitable from the start.
Mm-hmm. Did you have anything to do with the other games, Coronis Rift and the Eidolon?
I didn't. They were after my time. As was my very favorite of all of them, which I have to admit is Grim Fandango. Are you familiar with that one?
I don't know that one. Tell me about it.
Oh, man. It was a very clever idea, and I don't know whose idea it actually was, but at that point it was really difficult to have graphics that was realistic. And so even though you would eventually, even if it was Pong or something, you'd start to see little blips as being entities. Mm-hmm. You always had to go through that period of looking at this rasterized thing as trying to think of it as a person. And so with Grim Fandango, the setting is the Day of the Dead stuff. The principal character is a skeleton, and it's really easy to draw a skeleton. You don't have to draw all those facial features that move and stuff.
Right.
And so they, a clever storyline to do with your main character having a job in the afterworld, helping people, find their way through the afterlife. Anyway, and so, but that was several years after I was gone from there.
Did you do anything with doing graphics for movies, or were you basically just involved with making the games?
Just games. Well, we of course had, because we were physically in the part of in LucasFilm, we had opportunities to do things like go next door and scream for Ben Burt to record it and turn it into the sound of somebody in an Indiana Jones movie being dropped into a volcano.
Nice.
Or go into the sound studio, and our instructions were to make party noises in Chinese. And so at the very beginning of Temple of Doom, I believe the scene starts with a champagne cork popping, and then it's nightclub party, and that's all. That's us sitting in the sound studio, trying not to say any English words, but have a good time.
Nice.
And of course, there were those times when we couldn't park because the Ewoks were filling the parking lot.
You can elaborate on that.
Was, I think, sorry.
You can elaborate on that.
Well, I think that was the time when a bunch of T-shirts went around that showed what was it? There was a great Ewok T-shirt of being chased by somebody with a shotgun. But it was the same. I mean, it was delightful being part of that movie stuff and being able to go in the room next door to my office, which somehow we managed to open the door, even though it was supposed to be locked, and we found Indiana Jones' hat. As a matter of fact, we found all three of them. And one of the deals about working at Lucasfilm was we found when you're at Lucasfilm and in a position as I was to be able to bring a visitor in, you could get a trip of a visit anywhere by just offering to trade visits. So we had a delightful time behind the scenes at the aquarium, and we got to play with. There's South American penguins that are normally penguins are pretty scared of people, but there was one penguin, a baby. There's nothing cuter than a baby penguin. This one was, I guess, stupid because it likes people. And so, and there's a giant squid that liked people. It turned out, though, that it liked people enough to want them to come swim with him. And when we went up to visit him, I'm trying to remember who it was in our group that was petting him, and he or she just grabbed the person's arm and just yanked. Terrified that he was going to get dragged into the tank. But that is one of the things about Lucasfilm. It's both a benefit and a curse, because there were also lots of people who wanted to be near George, I guess is really what it is. Mm-hmm. And you really had to be careful. We had to be careful about letting people tell us game ideas, because
come back and see you later. Yeah,
and a really generic idea would be hard to say that was completely different from another idea that you ended up using.
Right. Do you remember any other ideas?
It's a strange sort of high pressure.
I'm sorry. Did you remember any ideas of things that you tried and threw away, or thought of and didn't even consider actually implementing?
Lots. I think the thing that was hard that people didn't get was, and I think maybe we didn't understand it at the start, but it became obvious, is that ideas are kind of the easiest part.
Yeah.
That lots of ideas can work if you do really good development on them, and that the development is the hard part. And so, I had to tell friends, no, don't tell me that idea. We're not short of ideas.
Right. So how long were you there, and how did your time there come to an end?
I was there about 2 years, and it became obvious as time went on. My sort of management approach is much more a peer kind of approach rather than a hierarchical one. I'm good at working with people and sharing ideas, and not so good at being just the manager and not having ideas, but simply sort of manipulating people who do. And as the department grew, it became obvious that I really shouldn't be the manager. And so I hired somebody to be my boss, which is, as we know from the Peter Principle, is a tricky business. Mm-hmm. But it worked fairly well. But then I got a really good offer from Bell Labs, and it was the do what you want to do and publish papers about it kind of offer. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like I'd had the most fun part of the games organization at Lucasfilm, the setting it up part, and that it was starting to be, it was going to need to be more of a production, crank it out kind of situation. So I took the offer for Bell Labs.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And what do you do today?
What am I doing today?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Today, I still go to some conferences and that kind of thing where I see my techie friends, and they ask me what I'm doing. And usually I would tell them, well, I'm running adult music camps. And
nice.
About half of them kind of go, oh, and walk away. The other half go, wow, adult music? And I say, no, music camps for adults. Then they go, oh, and walk away. So I'm running four camps, a couple of them in California and a couple up in Washington State. And it's very fun, and I'm continuing to write a lot of software to do things like arrange set lists for my band and that kind of thing.
Cool. Nice. What do you play? Banjo? What else?
I play most stringed instruments.
Nice. Yeah, every summer I go to the Jamie Aebersold jazz camp.
Oh, cool. How is that?
It's a good time. Yeah, I've gone twice now, and I'm already planning to go this summer. And it's.
And what are you playing?
I play piano.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, the whole music camp thing has exploded. One of the camps that I'm involved with is the Puget Sound Guitar Workshop, and it started in 1974. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of the traditional music camps, it's kind of the mothership that a lot of them have come from. But as I look around, there's just in every genre of music, there's a bunch of camps. It's a good vacation, less expensive than a cruise, and better for your brain.
Yeah. And I don't see why children should get all the fun of summer camps, and then you have to give up when you're an adult.
That's right. I'm enjoying it a lot more as an adult than I did in my little bit of summer camps as a kid.
What haven't I asked you that I should have?
Well, let's see. You've probably heard all the cutesy anecdotes about, Steven Spielberg and the Star Wars arcade game.
Tell me.
Where part of our deal with Atari was they gave us one of everything, which meant boxes and boxes of game console stuff, but also arcade games. Pole position actually one of the things I thought was kind of a significant thing was that about why our group did such great work, and later LucasArts had some troubles. And I think part of it was the licenses for Star Wars and Indiana Jones. When we started the game company, those licenses were leased to places like Atari. So we could not, and they were exclusive, so we could not make Star Wars games, which at first blush you'd think, oh, well, that's too bad. But I think it was a great benefit because it meant we were the creators of our games. We weren't just implementing somebody else's script. As time wore on, those licenses, Atari lost the license when they went under, and I think it then was leased to someone else. But after a while, those reverted, and by the time we were at the, say, 25th anniversary of LucasArts, or 20th anniversary, they were doing all the Star Wars games, and it's very limiting. And they looked with great jealousy on us having earlier been able to make up our own games.
Rather than being tied to some franchise or another.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. At the time, back in early on, we got to do approvals on the Atari implementations of Star Wars things, which was great. That meant we got to play them and say, well, this is great, except, you've made Princess Leia's skin green and it really shouldn't be green, or this part's too easy and that part's too hard. But along those lines, we had the Star Wars arcade game, which was pretty good. But I got poking inside it and found that a spot where I could, by grounding a pin, I could cause your spaceship to reappear at another random location in the sort of the galaxy. So I installed a little push button, the force button, which when you're getting stuck, you just poke the button and keep playing. Anyway, at some point, Spielberg was at LucasFilm. They were working on, I can't remember what movie they were working on, but he would come in every day around lunch and play that machine for an hour while he ate lunch. And when that project was over, he said he really wanted, he really missed it, so he asked Atari for the game, and they said sure, and they sent him a game. and he immediately called up and said, "Where's my force button?" Which of course was not part of so we had to go over and wire it up for him.
Nice. He wanted to use the force, of course.
Yes, right. Of course. But that led us to that thought that I think part of what made things a little hard for the later LucasArts was being responsible for making all the games that are sort of built into those movies. And it's kind of obvious in some places where there needs to be a game because there's a moment of tension and release which you could make a game out of. But I think that made it hard for them to have any time to do anything else. Yeah. All the various people who ever worked at LucasArts were very sad when Disney, having bought all the rest of Lucasfilm and getting LucasArts, closed it. But I can sort of see why they did it, because they probably had a team of people making games who had been looking forward to doing the Star Wars games, and it's kind of like, well, we can do what they were doing. They weren't doing anything unusual. And it was interesting also that somebody established a Facebook group for ex-LucasArts employees, mm-hmm. and there turned out to be hundreds of them. Wow. I thought that there'd be a dozen of us old fogies, and then maybe 25, 30, but no, there were hundreds. So a lot of people went through there.
Awesome. think I have just a couple more questions. On your online resume thing on LinkedIn, it said your job projects range from development of video games to research into the game's phenomenon and ways in which it intersects other forms of entertainment. And I'm wondering, what did that mean, and did you actually do any of that?
Yeah, well, early on, the assumption was, the initial mission statement was find ways of using new technology in the entertainment industry. And the kind of assumption was that meant games, but not necessarily. Mm-hmm. And so we did a certain amount of time looking around, trying to see, okay, are there other areas where, where things that are not already being done by the computer division would profit? And there really wasn't, because the other things that the computer division was doing, although they were all based on film needs, they were the same as the needs in other areas. So, for instance, the Andy Moore's sound work covered a whole lot of different industries, not just movies that use sound. And the computer graphics stuff being done by the people who became Pixar, again, covered a lot of other areas. And so the games industry seemed to be the place where we had limitations which the graphics group did not recognize. I remember at one point some magazine said that, that Lucasfilm had the best computer game graphics, or best computer graphics in the game industry. Mm-hmm. And Alvy Ray Smith said that the games industry had the worst computer graphics that Lucasfilm had ever done, because they had, in their group, they had sworn that nothing would ever leave the door with an artifact in it or with aliasing or. Mm-hmm. But of course, they could take all night to make a frame if they had to. We only had a 30th of a second.
Right. Yeah.
And so the assumption that this was going to be games pretty much turned out to be the true. Although games, did spread a little bit to also include things like the big amusement park rides and that kind of thing, which, although we didn't do them, we consulted on them.
Nifty. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users who played your games, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Oh, well, what would I tell them? Well, I'm just really glad that they played the games and enjoyed them. Every now and then I run into somebody who says, "I know your name from somewhere." "Oh, I know. You wrote," or whatever. And then they say something really nice about the game, which is, that right there makes it worthwhile.
Nice. All right. I have what I need. Thank you so much, Peter.
Okay. Well, welcome to it, and thanks for your interest.
Thank you. If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.